What's going on? I'm here today to talk to you about a new report released from a mega Swiss bank called UBS that highlights the cities with the highest likelihood of being in a real estate bubble. Scary part, two of those cities are in Canada. Stay tuned. All right, thanks for tuning in. As promised, I'm going to be going over the Global Real Estate Bubble Index released by UBS, which is a mega bank in Switzerland. Now, the reason I chose to talk about this is a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously the housing market is front of mind right now for everyone. And after going through a massive boom through the pandemic, we are now seeing major cool-offs in most cities in North America. And the reason I wanted to highlight this number two is because I'm Canadian, and two of the cities in the top 10 on this index are in fact large Canadian cities. In fact, one of them is in number one. So I want to highlight these features because it gives us an idea of perspective from a global sense and kind of gets us out of our own framework within our own countries and what we're kind of seeing. And maybe we don't think it's a big impact, or maybe we think it's much larger than any other area. The reality is this is going to showcase a little bit of what we're seeing on a global perspective, and some of these issues aren't just localized to our own individual markets. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, now if we're going to fully unpackage what this report truly means, it's important that we understand what a housing bubble is. By definition, this is a drastic increase in housing prices caused by limited supply, increased demand, and emotional buying. We saw a lot of this over the COVID period where there was that fear of missing out and everybody wanted to get involved and make sure they were getting maximized appreciation on their properties. Now that it has cooled off, people may be regretting some of their purchases, and in some of these major cities that we're about to highlight, people are definitely feeling the crunch. All right, in this particular index, UBS highlights three different categories, one being fair value, one being overvalued, and one being housing bubble risk. Now, this particular index features a sliding scale, and they use the metrics as follows. So negative 0.5 to 0.5 is fair valued, 0.5 to 1.5 is overvalued, and anything over 1.5 is housing bubble risk. Now, as mentioned, I want to go through most of these cities, but I will be highlighting the top 10 that have two Canadian cities, one of them taking the top spot, which is not a spot you want to be in for this type of list. All right, before we get into it, it's important to note that these are major cities across the globe that UBS has selected to represent the market as a whole. So keep that in mind. It may be a little bit different compared to your local market or a town that's nearby some of these cities mentioned, but keep that in mind as we go forward. All right, starting off with position number 10 is Miami, Florida in the United States of America. Now they scored a 1.39, which only puts them at the overvalued, which is not a column you want to be in, but they are still 0.11 points off from that housing bubble risk. Keep in mind, there's still a lot of changes to come with the housing prices changing. I don't think we're seeing the bottom of it yet, and we still have a ways to go. So there's a good chance Miami could fall into that housing bubble risk, but for now, they're still stuck at overvalued. Okay, moving up into position number 9, we're featuring Tokyo, Japan. They scored a 1.56 on this sliding scale, and keeping in mind that puts them in the housing market bubble. Now, as previously mentioned, this could continue to get worse. Having said that, I'm much less familiar with these international markets than I am in North America, so don't quote me on that one, but certainly didn't take long to get into that housing market bubble within the top 10, jumping from Miami to Tokyo. All right, moving into position number 8, we're featuring Tel Aviv, Israel. Now, they scored a 1.59, which, as I mentioned, everything here on out will be in the housing market bubble. But just even looking at the first three major cities that I've spoken about, they're in very drastic different parts of the world. And it just goes to highlight how much of a global impact this has had. It's not just localized, it's not just in your country. We're already looking at three unique cities in three very different parts of the world. So keep that in mind as we're going through this list. All right, moving into position number 7, we're featuring the beautiful city of Amsterdam, Netherlands. Now, this scored a 1.62, so a small adjustment from the previous two, but still obviously puts them in that housing market bubble. And again, to my previous point, first city in Europe, but again, a completely different area compared to the last three cities that's mentioned. So again, just reiterating the fact that this is a global impact that we're seeing right now. It's not just local to your market. All right, in position number 6, we're featuring our first Canadian city, and as many of you have probably guessed up until this point, it is Vancouver, British Columbia. They scored a 1.7 on the scale, which puts them well into the housing market bubble. And it's important to note that Vancouver has grown immensely over the last couple of decades, even before the pandemic. And some may dictate that it's been overpriced for a long time, and this was bound to happen. But obviously, with interest rates increasing, the inflation that we're seeing, and more pressures on outside investing into the country of Canada, this has definitely impacted places like Vancouver as well. And that's starting to compound on some of the already existing conditions that they are seeing out in that local market. As previously discussed, I just want to highlight the fact that this is indeed a global issue. Now, looking at the bottom 5 of the top 10 list, we can definitely tell that this is all across the globe in 5 very unique markets, starting in Florida in the United States of America, moving over to Tokyo, Japan, then to Tel Aviv, Israel, and the Middle East, then hitting Europe through Amsterdam, and then back over to North America, but in Canada on the West Coast featuring Vancouver. 5 very unique markets, but still having the same housing issues. So let's move into the top 5 and see who really is topping out this list. All right, in position number 5, we're featuring Hong Kong, which scored a 1.71, only 0.01 higher than Vancouver, but still firmly plants them in the housing market bubble, according to the UBS index. Okay, in position number 4, we've got Munich, Germany. The town known for its beer halls scored a 1.8 on the scale, which puts them in the housing market bubble. And again, this is a good example of getting back into Europe, but in a very different market, Germany compared to Netherlands. Having said that, there is another German city that features in this top 5, and I'll get to that in a moment. All right, in third spot, winning the bronze medal. This is definitely not a medal you want to be winning, but Zurich, Switzerland takes the cake at 1.81 on the scale, firmly putting them in the housing market bubble. All right, I already told you the top spot's going to Canada. I mentioned that there's 2 cities in Germany. So here we go. Number 2 spot goes to Frankfurt, Germany. Now, this is significant because this is the first real jump we're seeing in terms of the index score. Frankfurt scored a 2.21, which is 0.4 points higher than Zurich, Germany. Now, if you're having a hard time wrapping your head around these scores, maybe that's not as important to note, but it is the largest jump that we've seen throughout the top 10 by far. Now, this means that Frankfurt is likely cemented firmly into the housing bubble, and that's not good news if you are trying to sell property in this particular location, or if you're a little bit uncertain about being on the buy side, specifically in Frankfurt, but obviously with Munich being featured as well, you can tell it's maybe a nationwide issue. All right, I've made you wait long enough. So a number 1 spot is Toronto, Ontario, taking the cake. And again, not a gold medal you want to be winning, but for anyone that's local or in Canada, they can probably agree that this market has been inflated for a very long time and just amplified by the pandemic, and now they're starting to pay the price. So Toronto scored a 2.24, only a minimal increase from Frankfurt, but nonetheless enough to earn them the top spot. Again, not a gold medal you want to be winning, but nonetheless, Toronto finds himself at the top of this list. All right, hopefully you're still with me at this point. If you are, please like, comment, and subscribe. It goes a long way. I'm trying to grow my channel and provide as much education as I possibly can, specifically to my local market. But with this report, obviously it's a global report. I'm here in Little Halifax, Nova Scotia. What's in it for me? What's in it for my market? And the reason I like to be educated and try to inform others on this is that while this is a global issue, sometimes your local market isn't as impacted or affected. Now, I don't want to say that Nova Scotia is excluded or not impacted by this housing bubble. We absolutely are. But there is a couple things that I want to note. Toronto and Vancouver have extremely high average home prices. Nova Scotia does not. So what happens when people feel the crunch of inflation and interest rates, oftentimes seek havens or safe spots to invest their money or to move and live in as primary residence. And with our lower home prices, people may be falling back down into this category. So let's say your $1 million budget is now down to $500,000 or $600,000 comfortably. Well, you can buy some really nice homes out in Nova Scotia for that amount. Whereas $1 million in Toronto does not buy you much anymore. And that's just the nature of the beast. So that's why this information is important to me. Hopefully it's important to you. Hopefully you've enjoyed following at this point. But I just want to make it clear that this is a global issue that's happening right now, and it's important not to stay focused in your own little bubble and realize what's really going on across the world, what's causing it, and what you can do about it to better position yourself, whether you're buying, selling, investing, or just have an interest in real estate. Thanks again for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Cheers.